Thank you everybody for joining us this evening for a discussion on medical cannabis with Chair Pepper of Vermont Cannabis Control Board and also a panelist of a full panel of both cannabis and medical professionals from Vermont and also Maine. This is important for us because, as we know, we're not the only state doing this. It is important to look to not just the successes, but also maybe the challenges that other states have gone through as we navigate this terrain ourselves here in Vermont. So we will begin the conversation with some introductions. We will pass it around the room and let everyone introduce themselves for just a couple minutes, and then we will get into a discussion. The discussion will begin with an overview of what's happening in Maine, the Maine medical program that will be led by Isaac, and he'll have an opportunity to introduce himself. Then we will go into what's happening in Massachusetts, just sort of, or not Massachusetts, I apologize, Vermont, just a very high level overview of where Vermont's medical program is at. And then we're gonna go into some of the perhaps lessons learned that maybe Vermont can pick up from Maine, contrast the programs, maybe look at some other states, and then also look at the future of Vermont, and then also maybe where Maine might want to go as well. No program's perfect. There's lots of moving parts to all of these state programs. And again, for those attending, this is a medical cannabis discussion with the consideration that Vermont is moving towards an emerging adult use marketplace. So there is a relationship there. And we want to be mindful of that as we have this discussion. So why don't we start with introductions? And we'll start with the out-of-state guest. Isaac, thank you for joining us this evening. Spend a couple minutes to maybe share with the viewers who you are and what you do in Maine. Thank you for being here, man.
Thanks. My name's Isaac Elliott. I own Westbrook Creek, and like our company is called Lonely Bones. We've been here since 2014, so that's 7 years here, and we have a production facility, and we mostly wholesale to medical retail stores. So that's about it. Work in a lot of the technology for cultivation, and did that before in Washington, D.C., before I was in Maine from like 2013 to 2016 at the same time. So I usually just work in wholesale production. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Why don't we go over to Jessilyn? Jessilyn, thank you for joining us.
All right, hi, thanks for having me, Jeff. All right, tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a registered nurse. I specialize as both a research nurse and working with opioid use disorder in pregnancy and infancy withdrawal. As far as cannabis nursing, I'm board of directors for the American Cannabis Nurse Association. I also I'm the founder of the Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association, and we started that basically to help educate professionals and patients and consumers alike, while also trying to help patients that can't afford cannabis attain cannabis by either donations or helping people get clones and teaching them how to learn how to grow their own cannabis. So I'm also vice president here in Vermont for the American Nurse Association, and I run their government affairs committee. So I do a lot of the legislative advocacy and work around kind of speaking and advocating for nurses, but also for patients, because that's what nurses do, is we support and advocate and put patients first. I'm a clean green certified hemp farmer with Nurse Grown Organic. So clean green is all about clean cannabis, and that relates to patients. So we want to look at consumer safety when we're looking at clean cannabis, but also environmental protection at the same time. So as a nurse, I want to not just take care of patients, but also the planet and how important that is. I'm a medical patient myself. I've had over 40 surgeries. I'm also a caregiver for another nurse in cancer remission. So I love to cultivate cannabis and think that that is a big part of the healing that cannabis does and can do for us. So thanks for having me here. I'm glad to be here today.
Thanks for being here. Amelia, we'll go over to you next.
Yeah, I'm Amelia. I've been calling myself a chronic illness collector. I've got a list a mile long at this point. So I'm a patient advocate, a medical cannabis user. I'm a former Vermont Medical Registry patient, but I currently am not on the registry because I'm working with Jess and Jeffrey to create a program worth joining, in my opinion. So that's when I'll come back. I am a dog mom. You can see I've got my little one with me here. And I also work with cannabis brands and cannabis companies on branding. So yeah, that's about it.
Excellent. And James, thanks for being here.
Hey, of course. So my name is James Pepper. I'm the current chair of the Vermont Cannabis Control Board. I really got my introduction into cannabis policy under our former governor, Peter Shumlin. I, at that time, was able to kind of lift the hood a little bit on our dispensaries and see how they operate and what they're doing. And then I moved on to different things. I started working for the Department of State's attorneys and really heavy focus on criminal justice reform. I was part of a small team that has kind of been working continuously on expanding expungement eligibility, automatic expungement, raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction in our family courts, justice reinvestment. And I've always kept an eye on cannabis policy, but when we passed a adult use tax and regulate framework, it kind of reminded me to take another look at the medical program, and maybe to no surprise to the folks here, it hadn't changed a lot since I had looked at it 5 years ago. And I see that as an incredible opportunity because when you have adult use coming up alongside a medical use program, that's probably one of the most restrictive in the country. We have just a logical argument to make that we need to make it at least as open as the adult use, and take the lessons that we learn and kind of reimagine what it should look like. Look to other states. I'm very thrilled to be here. My 4 other panelists are probably the people that have influenced my thinking on this more than any others. I mean, there's a few other folks that I try to rely on for good advice, but I've had a number of conversations with Jessilyn and Amelia and Jeffrey, and Isaac and I actually had a chance to chat a few weeks back. So thrilled to be here, and just I should note that I can't really speak on behalf of the board. I'm one board member, but I'm happy to kind of listen and give whatever of my own personal thinking I can on this issue.
Well, thank you, James, for being here. And everybody, Isaac, Jessilyn, Amelia, I'll echo what James said. And I think that not just our work in Vermont, but I think that Isaac has a lot to share about what he's been doing, and maybe others in Maine as well. So thank you again. And just for everyone out there, I'm Jeffrey Pizzatello. And I am the co-founder and executive director of Vermont Growers Association. This event this evening is presented by VGA and Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association with Jessilyn. And I just want to add, for those that are watching, we will have a question and answer towards the end. We will allow everyone to speak if you wish. We will toss you the mic. We want this to be a positive and a productive and a community conversation. So this is an opportunity for those who attended, Vermonters especially, to ask us questions. And if you're not comfortable speaking, that's not a problem. Please feel free to use the chat, and we will work your statement or your question into the conversation. So please feel free to reach out to us throughout the evening, and we'll get your hopefully get your ideas and concepts into the discussion with everybody. So thank you again, and why don't we get this started by looking at the Maine medical program. Isaac, maybe without spending too much time, we're going to go over to Vermont as well, just high level, maybe provide everybody with just the core definition of what you guys are at and currently, because I know there's been some changes in your program. So where are you guys at right now for your medical program?
Maine has the most competitive market in the entire country. We have maybe not the highest number of growers, because you probably have more growers out in Oregon and in California, but there's about 1.3 million people who live in Maine, and our medical sales last year topped out over $500 million. And that's between 3,000 different businesses. So when I say it's the most competitive, I don't mean it's the hardest state to get a license in. Basically, if you're 21 years old and you don't have a criminal record, you can get a license. You don't have to be any type selected by the state or anything. You just send them $1,500 and you have a license if you have no criminal record. But it's the most dollars per person living in the state, which also means it's the most tax dollars generated. So we're looking at, you know, $30 to $40 million in sales tax generated and probably $50 to $80 million in income tax generated for the state. So you're looking at almost $100 million in taxes going to the state, being run by businesses by people who are like 21 to 35 years old, who maybe had no business experience prior to that. So, you know, I've operated in Washington, D.C. I'm originally from Massachusetts. I've been to California. I've seen what the market in California is like. Maine is the best market to be involved in. It's the best for people who buy cannabis because it's the cheapest. We see people from Vermont every day buying their cannabis in Maine because we accept out-of-state patients, and all of the surrounding states that have over-regulated their market and made it so that only 4 people or 5 people get a license. And then those people raise the prices because it's like a casino license. It's a license for them to print money and overcharge people. They all flee Massachusetts and they flee Vermont, New Hampshire, and they all come to Maine. So that didn't happen overnight. It's been like 5 or 6 years of continually having to work to change the laws to maintain what we had and make it better. But I mean, I'm just really lucky to be where I am and that it worked out the way it did. But yeah, Maine is the best market for all market participants. The government makes the most tax dollars based off the amount of money that they spend to keep the program going. The business owners make the most money for having a very small amount of investment they have to put in. They get to take the risks that they choose to take to be involved in the marketplace. And the consumers win because they get a very high selection of very high quality products, and they have lots of options. If they don't like one product, they have thousands of other people they can go buy the product from. So it's fantastic. And I really have to give credit to lots and lots of other people who spent a lot of time working at the state legislatures and with their towns to make that happen over 5, 6, 10 years, you know. So that's what's going on in Maine. I see you guys are at a different time and place in Vermont right now, but
so Isaac, is it fair to characterize Maine's medical program as effectively decentralized, or do you guys have large market actors, small market actors? Maybe break that down, and what regulations?
I mean, there are large dispensaries. There's Wellness Connection and Cureleaf, but I don't know anyone who purchases product from them. They have been, they haven't gotten a law passed that really helps them in the last year. Everything has been to make the market more competitive. They specifically spend money to make the markets less competitive because they cannot compete in producing and selling products that are good for a good price. They need a regulatory subsidy from the legislature that says, we are not going to make it so that your market is competitive. We are going to give you an ability to produce and an ability to sell in a region of the state, and we will make it so there's no competition there. If you look at who will fight against your bills that say, okay, licenses are now just $3,000 for however many canopy square feet, however many thousands of dollars for a store, anybody can apply. The number one group of people who's going to fight that is going to be people who do not want to compete. Everyone who enters the Maine marketplace knows that there's going to be 3,000 other people doing what you're doing, and you're going to have to either do it better or do it cheaper or give someone a product that they're not already getting. So there are large market participants, but we sell to dozens of stores. I've never walked into a store and they said, we can't buy this because Curaleaf just dropped off 50 of the best pounds we've ever seen, and they're cheap, you know, and we just can't buy anything from it. I've never seen a product of theirs on a shelf that wasn't their own shelf. So the only reason these businesses are successful is like the only reason that, you know, casinos in certain places are successful. It's because they get basically, you know, a subsidy is basically when the government compensates the price of something. They're getting a regulatory subsidy. They're saying, we're going to allow you to produce something that lots of people want, but we're going to make it so not a lot of people can produce it. And that brings the price of their product up. And then they make a lot of money. So it feeds back into the system, because then they take their money and they lobby to maintain that system. And since they're making millions of dollars a year and no one else is making any money, there's no reason that the law changes. In Maine, the reason that the law changed was we basically snuck in the caregiver system where people started making money. Not a lot, you know, you're talking an entire business running on less than 6 figures 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? But there was thousands of people doing this, and then they were able to pool their money together legislatively, and they kept going to the legislature and they kept iterating on the law. It used to be that we could only grow for 5 people at one time. Then we changed it so that we could sell, we could only grow the same number of plants, but we could sell to as many people as we wanted to. And our customer base has increased. Once our customer base has increased, we made more money. We went back to the legislature and we said, you need to regulate our stores, because there were stores that existed, but they didn't explicitly say in the law we could have them. So we got stores, and we said in the law explicitly, one grower can wholesale to another grower or to a store, same license type. Once we did that, the industry made more money. That's when we got over hundreds of millions of dollars in sales in a year. And then we went back and we start pushing more and more and more, basically to the point now where we just passed a law that says the regulator in the state of Maine cannot make a new rule without passing the rule through the legislature. So they can't come in and get lobbied by one of these groups that's a big state actor, and they say, you know, they literally tried to pass a rule that said that our businesses can only be owned by one person. Like, you cannot have a business partner, and that if you have a store and a grow, you can't have 2 corporate entities. The basic reason for this is, like, you know, if you have a store and someone wants to sue you frivolously and say, hey, I bought this product, it was bad, they can't affect the grow. It's very normal that if you have many locations of a business, you put them under a different entity. They wanted to stop that because the large entities want to shrink the other entities so that there's no competition. But basically, we passed a law that says if the regulator wants to make a new rule, they have to pass the rule through the legislature. You can't pass it in the middle of the night and just get it through and have it affect us, and then everyone has to go to court. That doesn't happen anymore. I have one thought about what's going on in Vermont. I'm not really following the details, but you probably have an idea of what you want to have happen up here, meaning a perfect system where, you know, these are the amounts you're able to grow in, and these are the stores, and these are the setbacks, and this is everything you want. If you just let the cat out of the bag if you literally get 500 square feet of canopy per license or 1,000 square feet of canopy per license, and you allow anyone without a certain criminal background that the state of Vermont decides is they're okay with, whatever that is, right? I'm not an expert on law, but if you get enough of those people to get them, and they're all making money and their families are making money and they're employing the electricians and the HVAC people and buying the real estate in their local community, and then they're sending their kids to school, and this, basically all of this money goes directly back into the community. That $500 million is going right back into Maine. Eventually you'll just see it at the legislature, because if you have many of these small businesses together, right, and the amount of money they're generating goes up, that will be directly correlated to how good the laws that are passed for the businesses, for the people, the consumers, because the businesses, when there's many of them and we're fighting for customers, right, that's completely different than when we look at the customer base and we say, well, you have to buy from us, so we don't care if it's good. Where else are you going to go? You're going to drive all the way to Massachusetts or to Maine? And that's the opinion of these businesses. They say, where are they going to go? There's 4 places. We're going to get 25% of the clientele. These people don't want to drive 8 hours. So if you can just let the cat out of the bag, if you can get it so that regular people can have stores and regular people can have small grows or medium-sized grows, and it's competitive, and anyone who meets the characteristics can get the license. You don't have to have a family member who knows somebody. You don't need to know anyone. You just need to have $1,000, $500. Everything else will take care of itself, and that's what we have in Maine, basically.
Very helpful. 2 questions for you, Isaac, just to maybe go into the Maine program a little bit more. Are there production limitations on the caregivers at all? And where is your medical program regulated and administered? Is it housed in the same agency as adult use, or is it separate? Are you guys unified?
So right now for caregivers, the cultivation limitations are 500 square feet of flowering canopy. If you apply for a dispensary license, it's a different amount, but they haven't released new dispensary licenses. The regulator.
You said in flower. I'm sorry.
500 square feet of flowering canopy.
Interesting. So you guys define flowering. That's interesting. Okay. Sorry.
Or you can have 30 plants of any size in flower that you want. So they could be 10 feet wide, but really in a production system, no one is going to grow large plants. The regulators, the Office of Marijuana Policy, they were implemented like right when legalization happened. So I guess, what was that, like 2016, 17 or something? And they have the medical program and the adult use program under them. And I mean, I haven't had any bad experiences directly with them, but you can tell how they want to regulate it. They want to regulate it so that, I mean, this is the same in every single state. And it's just because when they legalize cannabis anywhere, they say, wow, cannabis used to be illegal and we're going to make it legal. People who are basically prohibitionists at heart will say, well, this is a very dangerous thing, and we need to regulate it like it's basically nuclear waste. And then these very rich investment groups come in. We all know who they are. And they come in, they have no expertise at producing this product. They have no expertise at what it should be like. And they come in and they say, well, we have all the expertise because we have these people in our businesses, and we have this experience in other states. Their experience in other states is growing rooms and rooms full of mold and spider mites that if you were hired as a consultant to go look at, you would tell them to literally, they need to burn the whole building down because it's disgusting. But they're like, we don't really care because we just turn it all into oil and we force people to buy it. But, they are convincing regulators that cannabis is so dangerous, even though There's been thousands of pounds of cannabis at all of these states, even when they were illegal, when it was illegal, that, they need to be the only one with the license because they're the only one who can handle the nuclear waste, which is weed. That's basically how I see it. This is all going to get phased out in 10 years. You don't see these businesses that we see on the East Coast with limited licenses, where we have states with limited licenses on the East Coast. They're not destroying it in Oregon and Washington State and California. You don't hear about them there because they get outcompeted. They get outcompeted in Maine. You only hear about them where there's limited licensure. So it's really a regulatory issue, which is that half of the people who are being forced to regulate cannabis because it becomes legal in their state, most of the time not voted on in the legislature, but voted on by the people. Those people are prohibitionists. They do not want to allow it. So they allow the smallest version of a cannabis industry they can, while still being able to tell the public, we've legalized cannabis. There's 2 businesses or 4 or 6. It's not really legal.
Parallels. I'm hearing parallels here.
Yeah.
Amelia, and any other questions for Isaac from the panel, maybe before we go into Vermont? I'll start with Amelia. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question was, when you started seeing these changes in the caregiver program, starting with like stacking patients, selling product, opening storefronts, etc., did you notice an influx of growers from the legacy market, so the illicit market, joining into the legal market? Or is there still kind of that, separation of people who don't want to be a part of a regulated system? Or is it kind of split?
No, people do not want to be criminals. Being a criminal is not a thing that anyone really wants to be as an adult with children, with a future they envision themselves spending with their families.
Totally.
Being a criminal takes you away from your family and puts you in prison for an amount of time you don't get to determine. So when someone comes to you and says you can spend $1,000 and you can grow these same plants and you can bring them and sell them at the store down the street, people are crazy not to do that. And I've not met anyone who in the Maine market told me, yeah, I just don't want to do this like paying tax. People are dying to pay taxes. People are dying to be able and go buy a house like a normal person, go buy a car like a normal person, put their money in the bank, not have to have their parents have the car in their name. All of these crazy things that happen in the background when someone basically wants to grow a plant and has to rearrange their entire life for that. I think that if people really want to be criminals, they don't become professionals at growing a flower. They probably choose a different criminal enterprise. I mean, this is only farming. There is nothing different than this, than having a greenhouse full of poinsettias that you sell at Christmas time, or growing corn in a field and selling it on the side of the road. There is no difference. I grow with the same fertilizers all farmers grow with. We deal with the same problems with plants that all farmers grow with. We have people who grow plants. We have people who work in processing. We have people who work in packaging. It's strawberries. There's nothing special about this. And the only thing that stops people from being able to be participants in a legal market is setting the bar so high that you have to be a hedge fund to get the license. If you get a license, everyone goes to the DMV, gets a driver's license. They take a few classes, they can get a CDL license. If it's easy to get a license to brew beer in your house, or to brew beer for a small number of people, or to have a catering company, there's really no difference for you to be able to get a license to grow cannabis and sell it.
So I to follow up on that, the only reason I ask is because I find that with the strict regulation that Vermont has, you do have this environment of legacy growers who are insanely talented going, I don't want to be a part of that system. I'm not going to pay into that system. To be a caregiver is $50. It's not like an insane amount of money, you know, it's accessible, but because of the regulations surrounding it, nobody wants to be a part of that.
I mean, the license can be $0, but if to have it be $0, you need to have a $25,000 camera system that points to every position of your farm, or you need to prove 20 years of tax returns to get it. If you basically, the approval process and the regulation should be no different than any other approval process or any regulation you have in the state. And if it's not, you're treating it like a unique, rare thing, like it's nuclear waste, like you need people in lab coats to grow these plants that will literally grow in your backyard if there's enough water and rain.
I do have a few questions for you, please. The idea to me of actually charging and making a business and being, you know, financially lucrative off of being a caregiver is kind of mind-boggling to me, because I've been a cultivating caregiver for so long, and that's never been a part of the conversation or even a thought. So my questions really are around the difference between being a caregiver. It sounds like a caregiver has 1,000 square foot grow, and anyone can get that license. And then 75% of that they can sell at a retail level to make money. So what would be the difference in, say, the adult use recreational market? Are those licenses also 1,000 foot and unlimited and the same idea? So in my mind, a caregiver is almost, you know, I guess, like I said, I never thought of a caregiver in a way of making money and having a business entity out of it. And I do see it a little bit differently. So the questions I would ask is, you know, what are the lab testing standards and what's put into place to make sure that if you're giving, you know, caregiver licenses to anyone and everyone, and they're actually allowed to charge money, that's different than I'm growing for one person and I'm gifting them the cannabis I'm growing and I'm not making any money. So where are the parameters to ensure that the people who are providing medical cannabis have some consumer safety as far as the lab, you know, the lab testing and the clean building, and not just anyone and everyone growing in their basement and that being medical cannabis?
So the largest cultivation license in the state of Maine for adult use is 20,000 square feet of flowering canopy. The caregiver license is 500 square feet of flowering canopy. So the largest adult use license is 40 times the size. That's the largest license. In adult use, there's mandated testing for every single product. In the medical system, there's not mandated testing for every single product. If you put on a product on the label a THC, or basically any cannabinoid amounts, like you're saying, oh, there's like 17% THC in this, you have to be able to back that up with testing. That is the only testing that I'm aware of that's mandated.
Do you have
the adult use mandate, is that full panel lab testing, or is that just cannabinoids? Are you looking at contamination?
No, that's full. It's full panel for adult use.
Okay, thank you.
They have like some type of regulation where they want to implement testing in medical, right? And they haven't worked out the details of it. So there are labs that exist that you can go and voluntarily get your product tested at for what you voluntarily choose to sign up for. What I see is basically that all edibles that are sold in Maine, when I say all, I don't mean this is mandated, but I say if you go and buy edibles at a store, those are, and you buy it at like a popular store that sees, 150 people a day, all those edibles are basically being tested at a few labs that we know of. Flower is like the lowest priority for testing. All products that have a certain amount of cannabinoids in them that you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at them, meaning like you're not going to find flower that's 85% THC. It doesn't exist. Nothing is over 35 to 40%. And even then it's really not. The number one danger is that you're going to have like hot batches of edibles in a market, that you're basically going to be giving people things that they think are 10 milligrams and they're like 3,000 milligrams, because this is something that could happen. Now, I'm surprised that the state of Maine doesn't mandate and regulate that. Now, there are other regulations, like to sell edibles, you have to produce and store them in a kitchen that's certified by the state for public food production. Where I am, because I'm a commercial producer, right? They allow people to grow in their homes, but where I am, you need a certificate of occupancy. So like our facilities are inspected by the city every single year. So the code enforcement and the fire marshal are in there every single year inspecting us. We have to submit for a license every single year. That's just in the city. And then we have to submit at the state. When we submit at the city level, we have to give a list of all the chemicals we use. We have to store all the chemicals in basically fire retardant cabinets. Then they have to check that every year. They have to check our sprinkler systems every year. But this is more about the safety of the building, meaning that we're not in there making BHO in an unregulated lab and then a building catches on fire and the fire department has to show up. So that's a public safety issue. And then with the state of Maine has not a list of pesticides that you can use. They have a flow chart of a series of questions that you can ask about a product. And if the answer to every question is yes, then you can use the product. And if one of the answers to the question is no, then you can't use the product. It would be smarter if they had a list of approved pesticides and a list of not approved pesticides. Within the testing standards they do have for medical, they have some very well-known pesticides that they're testing for, like the active ingredient in like Eagle 20 is a known thing that they'll test for. But when you get to like 25B products, which are unregistered because they're not registered with the FDA, they're not testing for geranium oil in the test. So even with Maine being the best system and in the entire country, there's giant gaps where they just never got the work done. Because
I would say from a medical perspective, that's a very large gap to have a medical program that's not doing any contaminant testing. So as much as Maine might be a fantastic program in some ways, I would think that that lapse from, the consumer safety point is probably the number one biggest lapse that we need to, I hope we do better in Vermont and can ensure that we have some consumer safety wrapped into the program instead of, kind of leaving it out there.
So to follow up with Jessilyn too, what does the oversight look like when you have something like contaminated product that ends up in the public? So say a shop is found with, 5 or 6 separate customers that all get ounces with powdery mildew on them. What's the process then for, accountability, regulatory body coming in, etc.?
So there's no, they have testing standards for, this is what's interesting. There are testing standards for mold, but there is not mandated testing on every product. Does that, not asking, does it make sense rationally? I'm saying, you understand what I'm saying the system is.
Yeah.
So if you were to bring a product in and it tests, so like under 100, I think it's like 10,000 CFU is like what you can still legally sell a product under. 100 CFU is usually the, when a test comes back non-detectable, it doesn't mean there's not mold there. That means the accuracy of the machine that tests it can't see anything under 100, right? And then you have PCR testing, which is more accurate. And then there's a secondary type of testing that's like a plate testing, where then they do like a CFU count on the plates after they plate your product, right? So if, first of all, stores should be looking at the product when they buy it. If 5 people are coming back and saying that there's powdery mildew on product, that means that the purchasing department, first of all, the grower missed that in the entire production cycle. If you give them the benefit of the doubt, that they missed it in the entire production cycle, had powdery mildew and didn't know it. Like an hour ago, I'm walking through flower rooms before I'm having this conversation with you, looking at entire batches of plants that are about to go into flower. All of these plants, everything before it gets harvested, when it comes out, we're looking at everything. While we're processing it, when it's dry, when we're bucking it down, everything's getting looked at. While we're trimming it, everything has to get looked at. And then when we're actually weighing it, then when you're selling to someone, then they're repackaging an ACE. If there's a store that gets 5 people coming back with mold on their product, they are knowingly selling moldy product because they think they can get away with it. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm in the middle of flower and I have mold on a crop, the crop is dead. We're not going to try. There's nothing we can do at that point. There's nothing we can do with mid-flower plants. You can't fix that problem. You can only fix that problem before you get into flower, meaning you have to have healthy moms that you cut healthy clones off of, that you have a IPM procedure that gets them through the production cycle. There's no fixing a halfway through flower moldy crop. Legally, could they take it and extract it? Are there filters to remove the mold so it tests clean? Yes, and I know that a lot of businesses do that, but I'm in the business of selling flower. That's the #1 product I sell. So I have to have a mold-free environment. I have to have HEPA filtration in my flower rooms. I have to have ions being released in the flower rooms. I have to fog the flower rooms with oxidizers in between the crops to bring the spore count down. I have to test the air in the rooms to test the spore count, because if
Isaac, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think more so what Amelia is getting at is there is concern that at times two different concerns. Some smaller growers or newer growers, especially if we have unlimited caregivers at an exponential rate, don't know and don't see powdery mildew. I help patients all the time learn how to grow, and every year I have patients say, wow, look how many crystals are on my plant, and they're not recognizing it's powdery mildew. So I appreciate your attention to detail, but I think we're concerned about people who don't recognize it, and then on the flip side, people who do recognize it and are putting it through production because they're worried about either losing, their money because this is a cash crop, or really don't have the ethics that we want to see. So what are the standards or the parameters to ensure that consumer safety, which from my understanding and my standpoint is that mandated lab testing? And then Amelia's more looking at, in my opinion, Amelia, correct me if I'm wrong, what are the repercussions? So when a place does sell that, and again, I appreciate your attentiveness and your explanations to what you do along the growth cycle, and that's what we hope everyone's doing. But the reality is some people don't know to do that, and there's other people that are knowingly doing that. And then what are the parameters to prevent that, and what is the follow-up afterwards?
Okay, so basically what happens, all right, well, if you buy it somewhere and it's moldy and you tell them and they don't pull it off the shelf, you can tell the regulator in the state of Maine. You could inform them, but you'd have to get it tested if it didn't come with a test. If you guys are building your program from scratch and you're going to increase the number of producers, I understand what you're saying now. If you're going to increase to 1,000 new growers that you didn't have, just put a reasonable testing standard in place. 10,000 CFU sellable. Okay. I don't know if that's the number. I'm not a doctor. I don't understand. It's crazy to me that most of the stuff is non-detectable, but you could sell 10,000. I don't know, but just put a normal standing procedure in place. One issue is sample collection. That's what you run into, which is that they usually say, okay, well, we don't want these people picking and choosing what they're going to turn into the lab, which sounds like a good idea. Then you get to the flip side, which is if you only have 3 testing labs in the state and you have 1,000 growers, they can't go to pick up all this product. They can only pick up from 10 people a day. So you have to have some type of system where you're going to mandate these people test, do inspections at the facilities. Listen, do not have this thing where the only reason you inspect facilities is because someone complains. If you have a regulatory body, hire inspectors to go to these facilities every single year, at least once a year, unless there's an issue. And it doesn't have to be this like surprise thing. It's like, if you want to get this license, you're going to have to get inspected. You're going to have to walk us through all these rooms. The inspectors have to have an idea of what they're looking for. They need to know what mold looks like. They need to know what fire hazards look like. You can't expect your code enforcement to do it. And then you have to mandate testing, at least for every crop, you know, with reasonable testing standards. And you have to make it easy to get testing labs in your state. And you also have to make sure that the people who own the testing labs don't own grows, which is tough.
I want to jump in and
Affordable.
I want to jump in and see if Chair Pepper just wanted to take an opportunity to ask Isaac some questions before we maybe just touched upon where Vermont's at and just continue the conversation. Go ahead, James.
Isaac, thank you for your comments. It's really eye-opening. I'm curious. You say reasonable testing standards. You know, what does that look like? You know, one of the things that we're trying to do in the regulatory board is to limit the barriers to entry, to reduce costs for small cultivators. But we have to balance that with the consumer safety issue that you're hearing from Jessilyn and Amelia. So what is reasonable testing, and what would it mean to your financial viability if you had mandated testing similar to the adult use in Maine?
Well, when we get tests done, they're getting done at the same labs that do the adult use testing, because there's only so many labs that are testing for cannabis. The main issues would be for reasonable would be, first of all, sample collection. Meaning sample collection has to be able to be completed within the industry. If you pass a regulation where sample collection means that I have to wait 6 weeks for my sample to get collected, then we've come to a halt, because basically from the time that I harvest a product and it starts drying, within 4 weeks I need to be selling that product, because there's a whole production system that's coming down the train. And
is there a way to do that? Is there a way to do that remotely? Like, could, you know, you have an inspector, like, you know, look at a crop from a central location and do like random sampling? You know, I'm just trying to think like how to reduce these barriers, how to thread this needle, like how to not have unnecessary delays in any aspect of the supply chain.
You need to be able, well, I haven't seen it where they have samples collected by the laboratories and they're able to handle a program as large as Maine, because there's just too many producers, right? And there's not, the labs are not mandated by the state, meaning for every time 500 people sign up for a license, they don't just build a new lab, right? So you need to be able to bring your sample there. That doesn't mean that you can't have product randomly pulled from the shelf to see if it matches the test results. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that it's keeping people honest. But it is easier if the producer puts it in a bag provided by the test, that once you close the bag, you can't open it again. You bring it to the lab. That represents an entire batch of production. A batch is anything which is the same product produced at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I have 2 different strains in one room, 2 different types of products, I need to take 2 samples, right? Sample taking procedures, it's not that complicated. You could mandate that they photograph themselves while they do it. Yeah. I have this metric tag with this metric plant. I take this thing off of here, photograph. This goes into a log system. I bring this to the laboratory. They check it in with the metric tag. And then it gets tested. And we know that, you know, 5% or 3% of all the products in the state get pulled off the shelf to see if the test run on the product is within a certain margin of error of the test originally done by the producer. And because you get into this thing where it's like you put too much work on the testing company. The testing company, their expertise is to run very specific equipment that has to be really dialed in with like sample material. They need to focus on that, not on how to pick up 125 samples a day and get results out. You know, because that should be on the producers to get the sample in. Without getting your test results back, you can't sell your product.
Right.
And I
So they'll get over there to the testing line.
I just want to say, I didn't mean to jump in. I just feel like that sounds like it would be in alignment with most other industries as well. That burden is on that producer to, you know, there's that infrastructure in place to come and pick it up. I want to be mindful of time. We're coming up on 7. I wanted to spend just a couple minutes high level overviewing where Vermont's at, and those who attended. We will move into more of a question and answer slightly after 7. We're trying to wrap up around 7:30, so we're trying to give everyone a good 20-25 minutes to have a question and answer. Any sort of final questions for Isaac, maybe before we go into just a high level of what Vermont's looking like right now? James.
Could I do just one more? How does Maine, and I know I can just look this up, but while you're here, how does Maine handle qualifying conditions? Is it a list? Is it a whatever a doctor thinks is medically appropriate?
Anything a doctor determines is appropriate for their patient.
Got it. Thanks.
And if I don't mind, a follow up to that, do you guys have a definition of like medical professional? Does it have to be a doctor? For instance, in Vermont, I believe a naturopath can prescribe.
It doesn't have to be a doctor. It might be a nurse practitioner. It might be someone who's working under a doctor. I'm not exactly sure the technical terms for this. And it can also be remote telemedicine. So you can do it over Zoom.
What does reciprocity look like in Maine, if at all?
We have reciprocity with, I think, almost every other state that has medical licenses, as long as the person who has the license has a state ID issued by that state. So you can't be like Vermont resident with a California medical license. You have to be Vermont resident, Vermont medical license. They both have to be active. And then you can buy in Maine. Maine is regulated. It's not the Wild West, but it is loose. Like with the stuff with the details of testing and stuff, what I find is you go through a legislative cycle because all the laws have to get passed in like the 128th Congress of the Vermont, whatever, you know. And as you get further and further into this, you start out with a whole bunch of goals, and by the end, you're talking about like 1 or 2 things because you know that like the final voting date is coming. And then everybody like forgets for a few months about everything they thought about, and then they come back and they start caring about it. And it's like this cycle that restarts, so you don't get a lot of issues taken care of. The times that I've seen like the state take care of the most issues, and by the state, I mean like the people, the patients who care, the industry, is usually when there's like a something that threatens the life of the entire program. People will get together quick. When things are pretty good, people start to stop caring, you know? And that's what I'm worried about in Maine now, is that like things are going to be good for people. They're going to stop caring. And then we don't really like accomplish anything else.
Your medical dispensaries for profit or nonprofit?
Everything is for profit now in Maine. They started with caregivers being for profit and dispensaries being nonprofits. They then changed the law that dispensaries are for profit and caregivers are for profit, and adult use has always been for profit, however long that's existed.
That sounds similar to what happened in here in Vermont. So why don't we really quickly overview where Vermont's at, Jessilyn, and I think Amelia, you can maybe fill in some of those gaps. High level, just some of the details, just to provide some context for maybe those who are watching who aren't familiar with where Vermont's at. And then we'll move into just go back into some of the contrasting and some Q&A.
Cool. So just a brief overview of how the program works, I guess. If you have one of 11 or 12, I think, qualifying conditions that range from, terminal illness, Crohn's disease, the things that people know you get a medical card for, that's what you get one for in Vermont. You have to have a 3-month-long relationship with a doctor. And then after that 3-month relationship, they can write you a prescription. You take all of the paperwork with your doctor's signature. You attach a check for $50 and a headshot. And previously, up until now, you've sent it to the state's Department of Public Safety. And then they send you a medical card. The whole process can take a couple weeks sometimes. Once you have a card.
Online. They're just starting, or I don't know how long, but they've been doing it online as well.
So once you have your card, and while you're filling out your paper, I should note, you select a dispensary that you want to go to. And previously, up until recently, you had to either choose to shop at a dispensary or choose to grow at home / have a caregiver. Now you can do both, but you have a preferred dispensary, and it goes from there. You're allowed, Jess, you always get the plant count right, and I am always one off. So why don't you go from the growing side of things?
Yeah, so as a patient, you are allowed 2 plants in flower only and 7 in veg. And as a patient, you can also be a caregiver, which allows you to double that. So then you can have 4 in flower and 14 in veg. And that's the largest count someone in Vermont can have.
Yeah. And then, so just kind of bouncing back and forth from what Maine does and does not have, caregivers don't make money. You cannot legally sell the medicine that you're growing. So everything is not for profit. You're donating everything. We don't have reciprocity. So outside states cannot utilize our medical program. We have 5 state dispensaries. And until we have 7,000 patients on our patient registry, we cannot open any more in statute.
We can only caregive for 1 patient, and where in Maine they can do that for 5 or 6 patients, correct? So that's a big difference here as well.
Yeah. And then where was I? Oh, so sorry, I lost my train of thought. Jess, why don't you keep going?
I think that's really it. There's that's the basics. I think Pepper nailed it with 1 sentence in the beginning. We have pretty much one of the most restrictive programs in the country, and it hasn't changed in many years. So we have a really great, unique opportunity to make some large changes. And we've been advocating and hope to see some bigger changes, from, allowing more caregivers to definitely increasing the plant count, drastically changing to allow any medical professional to make that decision as to what is the ailment that is deserving of a verification for a cannabis card, to have that access. I think another thing, we need to always keep looking at is affordability. Unfortunately, when we look at the medical world, cannabis is extremely expensive, which makes it not an option for too many people.
Yeah. And I do want to just bring up the point I was making earlier about the number of patients on our registry. So we have 5 dispensaries in the state, and they have these now that we're looking at adult use and what's written in for adult use and what will be allowed and not allowed, these 5 dispensaries have some, in my mind, insane benefits over our adult use dispensary. So for example, when Vermont legalized adult use, they implemented THC caps. So all of our solid concentrates are now capped at 60% THC, flower is capped at 30%, and edibles are capped at 5 milligrams per serving. But our medical dispensaries will not have to adhere to any of those caps. Medical dispensaries can also deliver, whereas adult use cannot, to patients. And so what we're kind of trying to do to mitigate the inaccessibility of that is allow any medical patient to buy from any adult use dispensary and just not pay the 16% cannabis tax. that anyone without a card currently is going to have to pay, because in the medical dispensaries, those taxes don't apply to medical patients.
And I'd say in the same breath, Amelia, we're also hoping to get those THC caps lifted in the adult use market. And because the reality, and I use this, Amelia always says, I use this stat all the time, 7 out of 10 Americans are on pharmaceuticals. So that means 7 out of 10 recreational adult use cannabis consumers are likely patients and using also for a medicinal aspect. And we know there's a lot of veterans, there's a lot of people with licenses like myself who was hesitant to become a medical patient because of having a professional license and putting, my name attached to that in the system, from single parents and, having concerns because this is still such a stigmatized way of consuming, a plant. So I think there's also other reasons we're trying to recognize that people are shopping at an adult use market as much as a medical dispensary, possibly from a lot of the anecdotal feedback we get, and that how important it is for them to have access to those higher doses. I give examples all the time of working with veterans who just do not feel comfortable being or cannot have a provider because of their insurance and where they're at in that can give them that medical card and that sign off for that. So that's a big population we really need to support and who should be able to have higher dosing available for them as well.
And I will point out that among Vermont's list of, symptoms that can get you a card, substance use disorder is not on it. And Vermont, while we are not years ago, we were the worst state in the country in terms of statistics of opioid use, we're still up there and our numbers skyrocketed once COVID hit. And we still don't have substance use disorder as a qualification for a card or an opioid prescription. So that's another one of those things that seems small and incremental, but we've still kind of had to vouch for the last year. I did have a question though, while Jess and I were going back and forth, Isaac, do you know if there are programs? I've heard of rehabilitation retreats in Maine that use cannabis as a harm reduction drug in opiate, substance use disorder and opiate use disorder. Have you heard of any of those programs and how effective they've been in Maine in regard to substance use disorder?
I'm not aware of any specific programs that are doing that. I know that that's a qualifying condition, and I know that we have patients who used to have opiate addiction or struggle with it and are using cannabis now instead. But I'm not aware of specifically any retreats that are doing that. I really work in the specifically the production side and wholesale, so I'm not seeing a lot of retail patients. But
okay,
you were talking about affordability of how expensive cannabis is, and cannabis is cheap in Maine because lots of people produce it.
Yeah,
and that's the only way to make it cheap. It's cheap enough that we can give it away to people for free when we think we should, and it's not we're great people for that, but people show up and someone will contact the person who does retail for me, and they'll tell me what the person's situation is. I'm like, dude, just give this guy this stuff, because this $200 we're going to get for them, this person really needs it more. But that's only because we can produce piles and piles and piles of it, and other people are willing to pay a high price for it. So really, this increase in production offsets to be able to give people stuff who really need it. And that just doesn't happen when you have a really limited market.
Yeah.
There's
and
no incentive for them.
Yeah. What would you say in Maine is the average cost? And I know this can differ based off things like quality and where you are, south to north, but what would you say is the average cost of a medical ounce, let's say?
I mean, I think you could, the best stuff might be in the mid 200s. And most of it is a lot less than that,
Yeah.
So, but when I say the best stuff, I mean, this is the most sought after stuff bought at a retail store where it's being resold by a different person. And if you work in the industry, if you're around the industry, you're getting like the best stuff for like 175 to like 225 maybe. And like, you know, you can buy very, very, very much. You can buy an ounce for $100 to $150 in Maine. I'm not saying it's the best.
Yeah.
Grown indoors. This might be greenhouse or outdoor or whatever, but like if you just need cannabis, you can get it affordably in Maine.
Oh, that is so amazing to hear. I can't even tell you, compared to our prices here and the amount of patients I speak to, that is just inaccessible due to cost. So thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear.
What would you guys say our numbers are for those listening? Amelia, Jessilyn, I don't know, respond. What are Vermont's averages if you had to for our legal market?
So as I stated, I'm not currently on the registry. I haven't gone to the dispensary in a long time. But when I was going to the dispensary, I was spending about $1,000 every time I went. And Vermont has a 2-ounce limit on product that could be purchased at a time. So that was between concentrates, edibles, and flour. I was spending about $1,000 every single time I walked into the dispensary. I'm seeing in the side chat here somebody putting out the number $375 for an ounce, which sounds about right.
You can buy an ounce of BHO for $375 at a dispensary.
And that $375 ounce does not have that full panel lab testing. So we have to, consider the lab testing, and that is an expense, but that's, I hope and also see as part of what we need to build into the state program is affordable lab testing. So as much as we talk about lab testing, we need to make it affordable for, the producers.
The cost of, I mean, I know that you're saying it's $375. Like, lab testing is not that expensive. You know what I mean? Like, when I'm testing something, right? If I'm spending $100 or $200, I'm testing like 20 or 30 pounds of weed. You know what I mean? Because I'm taking samples and samples and samples out of it. Because that's one batch, right? I'm not like producing 1 pound and testing that pound and then testing the other. If you have 10 pounds, you're supposed to take like grams out of each of them and mix them together. So you get like a sample that resembles the whole batch, not off the top or the bottom. You're supposed to take some from all parts. So like the cost, what 10 pounds of weed costs, like retail, let's say it's $30,000. Like $200 is not forcing it. It's $375 because there's 4 of them in your state. That is it. End of story. There's no other explanation. They're going to keep it that way because they're getting $375 because they're getting like $6,000 a pound for trash. And in Maine, and when I say 250, when I say mid twos, I literally mean like the best weed in America. And I'm not saying I grow it. I don't grow the best weed in America. I'm saying the best weed you could get if you don't grow it yourself for like $240. That's being sold to the store for like less than that. And that stuff can still get tested. And it's just, they're just ripping guys off. I feel bad.
I want to jump in and say, Amelia, we'll go over to you. We're coming up on 7:15. So those who are in attendance, please feel free to raise your hand and we will bring you into the conversation. We are fielding some questions as well. And I want to get those into the conversation as well. Tito Byrne, Tito asked through the Q&A, and I don't know if we can answer this, but he says specifically, when can we expect some the current medical program to see some changes? When can we anticipate that? Is it when, so we have the sort of the loose deadlines or time frame for the rec market. Is there a time frame at all for the medical market? This might be for James, and he asks specifically things like plant count and whatnot. Chair Pepper, I do know that you guys have an October milestone. I don't know if you want to speak to that or just speak to Tito's question, and it's available in the Q&A if you want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that we as the board can do. There's certain things that the legislature can do more quickly than we can. However, I have not seen a lot of movement in the medical program over the last 5 years. So I wouldn't really expect it to happen that way. We inherit the medical program on January 1st. And I think on May 1st, all the rules get torn up. So we need to have new rules in place. And I can't speak specifically to Tito's question, whether we can file emergency rules or, whether that's a path we want to go down or what. But I would say early next year at some point, we'll probably be able to fulfill the mandates of Act 164 and try and make some loosening up of the medical program.
Can I follow up to that, Jeffrey?
Please.
So Pepper, I know that previously I've kind of harped on you guys a lot about the medical marijuana cannabis fund. And I know in a previous meeting, you had said that you were kind of looking into it and how we could segregate that fund from the general cannabis regulation fund. And I was wondering if there was any update on that as well.
I don't have an update to that. I can tell you that the question has been posed to our executive director. It's been posed to finance and management, our kind of budget folks. So, I mean, I know it's an area of great concern and anxiety because that money belongs in many ways to the patients. And it's there to fund the program. It's not there for adult use. So I know that there's a lot of anxiety around it, but I don't have a specific answer for you other than that's how I see it. So
appreciate that.
Excellent. And again, anyone who's in attendance, feel free to raise your hand and we will call on you, or feel free to use the chat as well and we'll get your question into the discussion. What do we have here? Excellent. One thing that I think stands out to me is, and I don't want to harp on this too much, is the THC caps that's unique to Vermont. I'm curious, Isaac, do you feel like, what impact would that have on Maine's program? And is it?
Can I expand the scope of that question a little bit also, just for my own edification, which is, do you have prohibited products in Maine? Do you have, is anything off limits there as far as what you can produce?
No. I mean, you're limited as a consumer how much you can buy at a store at one time. Yep. But the concentration of THC in that product, no.
Yeah.
So
I don't want to derail from Jeff, but yeah.
Yep.
I was just curious about that as a follow-up, I guess.
James, if you want to go ahead, please feel free.
I would ask, as a follow-up to that question is, do you guys have any education within your medical program or your adult use program? Is there any, a card that says how to use edibles slowly to avoid overconsumption? Is there any, anything as far as that kind of aspect?
In most stores, you'll see information, right? But also the state of Maine spent money to do media campaigns about now that cannabis is legal and people don't drive. This is, explaining that edibles take longer to hit you and all this stuff. Yes. It's not centralized in just one place. I've seen the state doing it. I've seen different nonprofits doing it. And I've also seen individual businesses doing it. And you see a lot of information on product labels now because there's an incentive. If I have a product, I don't want people to get sick. I want them to continue to buy my product. So I'm going to try and put information on the product so they have a good experience. Also, so I don't make edibles, but I understand the big part of it is the divisibility of the product. Doesn't matter if the product has 1,000 milligrams in the package. If I separate it into enough pieces and I'm very clearly marking that everyone is 10 and that you should take 10, you should wait 1 hour and 30 minutes. My dad just called me, who lives in Massachusetts, and he bought edibles at a dispensary. and he was telling me how he didn't, not a dispensary, like an adult use store, and he was telling me how he didn't know how many milligrams. I was like, please go read the package, like right now, before he's like 75 years old. But
can I ask, Isaac, right now in Vermont, another thing that we're kind of talking about and discussing, and we're once again kind of the first in the country to talk about it, like THC caps, is roadside testing. And I was just wondering if we could get your thoughts on if that is being talked about in Maine, what you think about that, and what you think the logistics of that would be.
You said roadside testing?
Yeah.
Do you mean like a testing lab on a truck that pulls up to your facility and gives you results like right then?
No, it would be, I believe, and Pepper, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're talking about a saliva test.
So in Vermont, we have regulation for our adult
drivers, not for, yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I mean, personally, I'm unaware. I'm sober. I don't consider, I just drink coffee. So I'm not sure. There has to be something, but it has to be fair. It's like with all of this stuff. You have to have testing. The testing has to be accurate, has to be fair. The system for testing has to be fair. The licensing has to be fair. You don't want people completely out of their mind ripping through a playground at 82 miles an hour. The other thing is, in my experience, because I've worked in this industry my entire adult life, I don't see high people doing lots of stuff like speeding down the road. It's like they mostly just like sit there and relax,
Yeah.
That being said, there's probably a point where you're too high, but then you need to educate people of like how much consumption is going to get you to there. Because if everyone's been driving around high already, and then we just make everyone, this is like the whole problem with a lot of regulations of cannabis, is like it's underlying prohibition. It's like we've ended prohibition, but I'm still in charge and I still want there to be prohibition. So maybe we can make it like this and people will still get in trouble. Because what it is there's people, not everyone, but there are people who have powerful positions who think that people who consume cannabis and produce cannabis and work in the industry are like not the best people, and they don't want it in their backyard. So I don't think we have a test in Maine. I think we have an OUI test where they probably like look if your eyes can track a pen and you can walk a straight line. There isn't a breathalyzer test that we have.
I
don't know.
Something similar looks like set up. We've got law enforcement officers in our state that are trained for that sort of field work. And in regards to the technology behind testing cannabis on site in the field, I think that has yet to be arrive. So we might be putting the cart before the horse in our state in some of that, but it's interesting to hear what Maine does. I just want to point out that we've got a couple members from the Marijuana Symptom Relief Oversight Committee with us. So if you are, feel free to chime in and ask a question. If you guys raise your hand, we'll give you space. We want to have a good sort of inclusive conversation about the future of our medical program here. I also want to be mindful of time. We've got about 7 minutes left. We have a couple questions that we can turn to in chat. One reads, in Maine, is vertical integration the end game or what every business strives to, or do you see businesses like standalone labs and standalone stores having success in the industry without producing themselves? That would probably go to Isaac.
Jessilyn, did you have a question before I answer that?
No, I was going to quickly say something, but it doesn't relate to this. It's just one thing we haven't really mentioned yet, and I think it's important to mention when we're talking about Vermont's medical landscape, is that the medical program will be under the guise of the Cannabis Control Board soon. We haven't really made that clear. And, with that, that's why we're looking at changing some of these laws and hope things will change as they move forward. And the other thing to know is that as of right now, there's no medical professional involved on the Cannabis Control Board or the advisory board. So that, I think, is just another thing to note when we're talking about our medical program here. But you can answer your question now. So
Yeah, we lost Jeff for a second. Standalone businesses. If you're good enough at what you do, you can be a standalone business. If you're not very good at what you do, you might need to vertically integrate. But if you're not that good, I don't know how you're going to vertically integrate anyways. So whatever you're doing, try and be excellent at it. I think in some senses, it's hard for retail stores in high density areas, where by that I mean where there's lots of retail stores, because there's only so many products that are highly sought after. You get something called channel conflict, which is when many businesses carry the same product, and that can be a problem. That being said, I'm not seeing any businesses really struggle. The only businesses I've seen struggle in the industry are cultivation businesses when they really didn't have any expertise to operate those businesses, or they didn't have enough money to operate them. If you have a store and other people are growing it and you're selling it, you know, they can give it to you on credit, and you just have to show up to your store and price it affordably and be open. And yeah, standalone extract labs are great. You know, there's tons of small hash makers in Maine, people who don't have enough money to have a solvent lab where you have to have like the explosion proof rooms and everything. And they're just making water hash and rosin, and they're really successful and they're really popular. And you can do that if you have a walk-in freezer, basically. So yeah, I wouldn't mandate, you know, like, let the market participants decide how the market should be. Don't mandate that they have to be vertically integrated.
no, here, Isaac, we actually have the opposite. Here we're looking at a future where only the medical dispensaries can be integrated. So it's interesting. It sounds like anybody in Maine can do integration. You know, they can get multiple licenses and kind of go for that.
Well, your caregiver license allows you to have a retail store. It allows you to do extraction without solvents, and it allows you to have cultivation. So your license from the state allows you to do that. Then you have to go to the town and say, hey, I have this license from the state. I want to put a store right here. Do I have the zoning for that? Go through their approval. You have to go to the cultivation location, do the same thing with zoning. But it's not like separate licenses. It's one caregiver license that allows you to do that activity. Make it a local decision, basically, and each town can decide. That way, you know, the towns that say, hey, we have a bunch of this unoccupied real estate that we'd like to fill. And if you say that, growers will show up the next day with like hammers ready to start building the place. If you just like flip the switch, they will show up anywhere. Pick the worst town in the worst county where you feel like you have the least infrastructure, the fewest people move to this place every year in Vermont, right? If you say you can cultivate 2,000 square feet of canopy and you can have an extraction lab and you can have a store, people will be there the next day spending like whatever amount of money to get the property going. So like, I'm in a disgusting mill building area where there's mill buildings that since the 70s have been empty. One of them burned down. They have like, you know, bad construction materials in them, bad roofs. The EPA has to look at them. And all you have to do is be like, you can grow cannabis in here. And like 20 cannabis growers showed up, and they're all like working basically 80 hours a week, removing everything, making the building new, like beautifying the area, buying houses in the area. Like, these people will move from the furthest location on the earth, whatever the opposite side of Vermont on the earth is, to that town and spend like their life savings to do this. That's how motivated the people who do this are. So you just have to like allow it under regulations that you're comfortable with in your state, whatever the testing is, whatever the local regulations are, whatever the taxes are. But like, you know, my business will just continue to grow and hire more people and expand, not because I want it to, but because people will buy the product, employees want to get paid more. They want more responsibility. They get more people under. It just naturally grows like that. And this is an industry. It's like I keep hearing about. It's hard to hire people right now in America. I have people like I've never met. I have like tons of 21, 22, 23-year-old people who want to do nothing more but work and learn how to build things and learn how to grow plants and learn about products. They're so interested in this. It's like amazing. And in Maine, we had a problem where our demographics were, we had all older people in Maine. The majority of the demographics were older people. And all the young people who were born in Maine wanted to leave and move to Boston or New York or DC or California. And I have people like moving from New York City where they grew up to come work in Maine, which is like, and we're not even in a nice part of Maine. We're not in Portland or some beautiful area up in Bangor. It's like, we're in the old mill towns where they used to make shoes. And we have people who are 21 years old being like, I don't want to go to college. I want to go work in the cannabis industry in Maine, which is a really unique situation. These kids are paying income taxes. They're getting paid enough where they're not getting money back at the end of the year. They're paying taxes, which is like, I wasn't in that situation when I was 21. 21-year-old people leaving New York City to come pay taxes in Maine, and they're getting paid direct deposit, which is just like mind-bending for me that this is where the industry is at this point.
Well, I'll say, and I'm sure James and others have picked, Vermont has a similar, I want to say, scenario when it comes to retention, and most importantly of Vermont youth leaving the state. So it's really, for me, it's really fascinating to hear you, Isaac, really describe the local multiplier effect within the context of the medical program. That's something that we have typically conversations around in the adult use space in Vermont, but it's interesting to hear we can sort of leverage that economic, factor as well in the medical space, something that we're not currently leveraging. So it sounds like we've got a lot of positive aspects that we can explore in our program moving forward, looking not just at Maine, but also other states. I think that's really fascinating to hear. I think Vermont I think that would be received well, at least from certain individuals in the state. Any sort of final, I want to be mindful of time, guys. We're past 7:30. So any sort of final questions as we sort of work to wrap this up? So not final comments, but maybe sort of last questions for Isaac or about Maine. Anyone from the panel?
Yeah, I guess just like my last question would be, what are some improvements in Maine that you think could be made to either your medical program alone or your medical and adult use program? Like, where do you see holes that could be filled?
Well, there's some complication. I mean, like, I'm very libertarian, so I don't like regulations in general. I've always just felt like, I'm sure there could be good regulations, but I feel like they're usually used as prohibition tactics. I think that our canopy size shouldn't be 500 square feet. I think you should just basically pay for the size you want. And if you have too much product and you have to sell it for very cheap because no one wants to buy it, then you go out of business. I don't see why the regulators, who many of them have never operated a business before, or grown cannabis before, or been in the medical field before, or are a medical patient, know how much size any business should be. That's one. After talking with you guys about it, the testing regulations in medical make no sense in Maine. That we have standards, but they're not imposed, like they're going to later impose them. But you could go voluntarily test it right now. And that, like, these products are across hundreds of stores right now. It's like scary because there probably are hot batches out there right now. One of the reasons I don't make edibles is because I feel like it's a riskier product to make. Even if I was to test it, if there wasn't a standard that I was shown in a computer to be complying with, It's scary. Yeah, so basically, I think you should pay for the size that you want to be. Personally, I don't like the concept of local regulation opt-in. I don't like the idea of local taxes, because we've seen in Massachusetts that like mayors of towns have gone to jail because they tried to extort the businesses that go in there. I think basically, if cannabis retail is a retail business, if you have a retail zone, you should allow it. I don't, what other retail businesses can you isolate and not treat as such? If you have production and cultivation is production, then you should be able to allow it. This idea they'll talk about, like, as I'm in a town, there's lots of empty buildings. And they'll be like, well, we don't want all the empty buildings filling up with weed grows. It's like, so you just want them empty? Like, if you really believe some other business is going to come in here that's going to offer the community a bunch of jobs and spend $3 million fixing the building, and contribute to the tax base, then like, I'm for it, because I have my business. But I drive by this building every day and it's empty, and it's empty the next year, and it's empty the next year, because like, cannabis is one of the few products and I don't mean this politically, but they don't produce cannabis in China and ship it to America. So the jobs in the mill that I currently work in, making shoes, went to North Carolina and then went to Asia. That's just what happened. They used to do the textile manufacturing there, and now they don't. We are the only thing that's looking for 100,000 square feet of space and all the electricity in a dirty old mill building. And the same thing is with like cannabis retail stores. They will go somewhere people don't want, in a building that they have to gut the entire innards of the building and rebuild it, because they can afford to do that. And yeah, I feel like the testing, that would be the only thing, like the testing standard should be like flattened out in Maine, meaning everybody should be complying with the same standard. And it's funny that they have adult use having the testing standard and they don't have the medical program.
Mm-hmm.
But this is like the thing where you have these two programs. Like, I almost feel like there shouldn't even be two cannabis programs in general. And they shouldn't overregulate it in general. They should just regulate it how it should be regulated, and not overtax it and keep it affordable, right? And then everyone can buy it. Because when I grow the plant doesn't know, oh, this is an adult use plant or this is a medical plant. Like, they all have the same chemicals on them. And if you need it for medical reasons, you will buy the products that work for you. And if you need it just because you want it, you'll buy those products. And we make these two systems. It's like the tax system is this. So like, people will go and get medical cards because the taxes are less in the medical system than the adult use system. And they don't really need it medically. They're just buying it for cheaper.
I would say, just as kind of a rebuttal to that for the need for two systems, in terms of patient protection and specifically a caregiver program, that's where I see the need for medical. But I'm totally with you in terms of retail, dispensaries, testing, all of that. There is no physical, as somebody who's like smoked, used, consumed both programs at this point, I guess you could say, realistically, there should be no difference in the regulation, cleaning, product quality, product safety between retail and medical use dispensaries. Where I see a medical program going is kind of like what Maine had, where the caregivers and the patients are the focus of that program and consistently checking in and doing what's best for them there. So in the sense of like the definition of a caregiver, let's say, so Jessilyn works sometimes with end of life and youth patients. So a caregiver isn't just somebody who grows cannabis for that person, it's somebody who can legally administer that cannabis. So I see where you're going with like almost wanting to combine the two programs and only have one. And I agree with that on a retail consumer-based, side of things, but I do think there is a place for a medical program in terms of patient safety, education, caregivers, that group.
And taxation affordability.
Taxation and affordability for sure.
Well, one of the issues in general, and this is like not a popular thing to talk about if you're like in my industry, is there's a lot of recreational use under the guise of using a medical card. And we see it every day. Now, I'm not a doctor and I can't determine when someone does need medical cannabis and when someone doesn't. But, first of all, it's weird that a medical card from the state would cost any money to me. That doesn't make sense. The state should just issue the medical card if the person meets the criteria for needing it. Even if that criteria you determine in your state is anything. But the idea that if someone, like if you're dealing with end of life patients, right? And they need to come up with $50 to get a medical card to then go buy cannabis to get it administered to them. It's like, they should just be able to get approved and then source the cannabis. I don't know how you can really do it, but it's like, there's just, when you look at medical cannabis, it becomes very wise. You have people who are getting a license because it's a way to buy weed, from people who have like a minor issue that they would rather use cannabis than a prescription drug or a pharmaceutical that they can get over the counter.
I feel like we can have another one of these. I think this was a fantastic conversation. I do want to thank everyone for joining us. I also want to say, for those who are watching, Vermont Growers Association will have this video, this entire panel discussion, available on our YouTube website. That's important. So we will have this resource available. We are very grateful to have a regulator, one of the new commissioners, with us. So James, thank you for taking the time. I know you had a heart out, so I really appreciate you spending the time with us this evening.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, I would say the same to you and Jessilyn and Amelia and Isaac. I mean, these are really important conversations. I personally am trying to oversee this transition of the medical program and making sure that runs smoothly, precisely for some of the reasons that we've heard today, and the necessity of the program. And I've thought for years that it deserves a reimagining. So I'm glad that we have that opportunity now.
And I just want to extend an appreciation, thanks to you, Isaac. Thank you for joining us, taking a little bit of a risk, and having this. What I really want to say was a fantastic conversation that was way overdue. So both of you guys, esteemed guests for this evening, I really do appreciate it. So thank you guys. And with that being said, Amelia and Jessilyn, colleagues, as we move forward in Vermont legislature and with our new regulators, that we seek this access, this affordability, this equity in our medical program as we move forward with our adult use space. So thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening, and we will see you online. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.